Thank you, Barry. Good evening, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out and kind of joining us. I know it's a frenetic time, and there's no better time to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is the cannabinoids and the science and the physiology behind it. As we're going through a viral pandemic, economic uncertainty, there's a systemic issue of anxiety and stress that's really taken effect across not only our country, but really the whole globe. And you can see very astronomical rates of anxiety. And this topic kind of speaks just to that, along with a whole host of other things that we feel are extremely important to drive value, not only to patients, but to the public and regular citizens and anyone who has access to this who's appropriate for it. So a little bit about myself. I am a clinical oncologist. I see patients full-time. I was with MD Anderson for about 10 years. And I'm now with the US Oncology, Texas Oncology Network, opened a new cancer center for them. And my passion comes from treating patients. So my journey into endocannabinoids and the whole endocannabinoid system and kind of learning about it was really over the last 24 to 36 months, where I noticed a huge portion of my patients on these compounds. One way or the other, they were getting them, many of them hesitant to bringing it up to us. And I had to educate myself. I use a lot of pharmaceutical grade medications, including immune therapy and chemotherapy and biotherapy and biologics in the treatments of cancer. And it is very important that we keep a holistic mindset to treating the patient, not just the ailment. So I'm a big believer in using all the science that the pharmaceutical industry and the peer-reviewed journals has given us, and then also extrapolate and utilize plant-based compounds for the patients that need it and value it. And really, when you learn and read about this system in the body, as well as all the cannabinoids, you're able to begin to understand the amount of clinical research we actually have on these compounds. And it's really at the forefront right now and just starting, and there will be a tremendous amount of research in the next few years as these things are deregulated federally. So, what I'll highlight today is I'll touch on the science of the endocannabinoid system, the cannabinoids themselves, including the endogenous endocannabinoids, some of the pathophysiology, and then how do you talk to people about it? What can you say? What can't you say? What does the data tell us? How do you speak to patients? How do you speak to family members? How do you speak to physicians and healthcare professionals about it? And then we'll touch a little bit on the products themselves. So, let's jump right into the science of it. So what is CBD? Well, cannabinoids come from the cannabis plant. There's over 113 and rising. As we get more and more adept at the technology and extracting these compounds, we learn more and more. So these are plant-based compounds that have real physiologic effects in the human body because they interact with something called the endocannabinoid system. That system is a series of receptors throughout our body, and there is a density of those receptors everywhere in the body. And I'll go through where we see these receptors and why they have the effects we have on our body when it comes to certain ailments that we use cannabis and cannabis-based compounds for. But cannabinoids are a wide array, and the two most common ones that you hear about in the highest volume is THC and CBD. They are 2 of 113 cannabinoids in that plant, and they vary based on strains. And there's a whole host of properties, but some of the things that you will hear me talk about repeatedly is anxiety and stress, sleep, neuropathic and inflammatory pain, seizure disorder, and focus. These are the things that we know these compounds help with. And then there's a whole host of other symptoms and disease processes that are being studied that I do believe will start to show efficacy of these compounds, including Alzheimer's, spasticity-associated Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and we'll go and touch on some of these things. Barry, next slide. So what is the endocannabinoid system? This is a real system in the body. These are facts. These are things that, in my opinion, are going to start to be incorporated into the medical curriculum in the coming years. A lot of this has now been developed and found since the early 90s, and we've had a tremendous amount of research from the neurology world. There's neurophysiology, and a lot of this has been mapped out. We have 2 receptors in the body, CB1 and CB2. This is what the endocannabinoids that are naturally made in our body and the plant cannabinoids that we get from the hemp and the cannabis plant interact with. CB1 receptors, there's a density of them in our brain and many of them in our organ systems, and CB2 receptors are in our peripheral immune cells. And they control a whole host of physiologic downstream functions in the human body based on what is activating them. Next slide. So when we talk about what are the compounds that activate and trigger these receptors in our body, think of them as three broad categories. There's endocannabinoids. These are natural in our body. We all have them. And one of them is called anandamide. There's another molecule called 2-TG. Anandamide is very similar to serotonin. It is the blissful hormone. It makes you feel better. It is everywhere in our body. It is like a neurotransmitter. It is broken down very quickly. Everyone's amount and volume of anandamide is varied due to numerous variables and expression of their genes that help make the enzymes that make it, as well as the enzymes that break it down. But the gist is that molecule is naturally binding to the CB1 and CB2 receptors in our body, and that molecule is very similar to serotonin. Phytocannabinoids are what we talk about. This is all the CBD, CBN, the THC that you see in states where cannabis is legal in terms of THC. These are coming purely from the plant. They also work on the same endocannabinoid receptors that our endogenous endocannabinoids work on, CB1 and CB2. And then the last category is synthetic pharmaceutical grade cannabinoids. And a lot of people are surprised to know that we already have them on the market, and they've been on the market well over 10 years. So the pharmaceutical industry does know the value of cannabinoids. They have created a synthetic one called Marinol. Marinol I use in my practice because it is the only pharmaceutical grade cannabis compound I can use. And it works for sleep, and not sleep, it works for appetite and mainly nausea because it is THC based, but it is synthetic. So it is duplicating the THC molecule without all the other aspects of the plant. That's why you will see it work, but it will be splotchy. You could see it work in maybe 4 to 5 out of 10 patients. Compared to medical cannabis, you'll see work in over 90% of your patients if you get the right strain for the right ailment. So when you look at this, look at them as three categories. And there is one last compound that is FDA approved. It is used globally, and it is from GW Pharmaceuticals. GW Pharmaceuticals has the only patent on a pure plant-based CBD THC drug, Sativex and Epidiolex. It is FDA approved for seizure disorder, as well as starting to be approved for pain. These are not synthetic. These are made by the plant, and the FDA has approved it. And there are over 80 peer-reviewed journals and 6,000 patients they've studied over 15 years with GW Pharmaceuticals, which has given us a huge amount of information on CBD and THC and done in a very thoughtful way. A lot of the clinical trials are done like we do them in the cancer world as well as in the medical field. So we have a lot of data on this.